Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Bird Bones Picked Clean, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by the avid reader _ sometimes writer, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
Bird Bones Picked Clean, Chapter 2. The city isn't all that drops. Abigail isn't sure what's pulled her awake, but something had. Tally is still deep asleep in her bunk, but her blonde sister is starting to toss and turn. Her brows furrowed and her lips slightly parted. The taller witch stretches and pads over to Rael's bunk, already murmuring softly when she sits down. Shh, it's all right, shitbird. The quiet reassurance seems to work. The old insult turned playful nickname, turned fond term of endearment, falls easily from her lips, and Rael sighs into her pillow as her face relaxes into a peaceful expression again. A noise from outside their door stops Abigail mid-yawn, and she narrows her eyes. She's gotten comfortable with almost every sound this building makes over the few months that they've been there, and what she's just heard is a very specific one. It's nearly imperceptible that what she's just heard is just the slightest creak of the floor. A noise she's only ever heard when one of her sisters was about to sneak back into their room. Both of her sisters are sleeping above and in front of her respectively, which means that someone else is about to try to enter their room stealthily. She clenches her jaw and tenses as the knob of their door silently turns and the door itself opens slowly. Abigail sits completely still and waits, watching as a beam of white light followed by a witch in black strike clothes enters and hits them with the wind strike when they look over at her bunk first. The entry of a second and third identically clothed witch just before the wind strike hits tells her that this is a strike team and a well-trained one. What the hell? They're all supposed to be asleep. The words are hissed quietly, and she can't tell who it's from. The sound of her attacking seed wakes Tally, but not before a fourth witch enters the room. This one is in uniform and moves quicker than the others. She's gotten close enough to tap both Tally and Abigail gently on the forehead before either can react. There's a quiet thumping sound while the redhead collapses back against her pillow and the taller witch can guess what just happened. She was sleeped, and she can feel her body start to sag and her eyes do their best to fall closed. She sways but is caught. She's trying to fight the work even though they haven't been taught how yet. I don't know how the hell Bellwether is still even partially awake right now, Abigail can hear one mutter. Good. She doesn't know what she's doing, but it's working. Kind of. Hit her again, a familiar voice orders emotionlessly, and another tap comes before she can fully recognize its speaker. She crumples. The last thing she sees is one of the witches doing the same to Rael before scooping her sister up and carrying her limp body out the door. Abigail wakes up in her own bunk twice. The first time she's barely awake for a minute, but it's long enough for her to hear muttered curses and feel a fingertip press against her forehead before sleep takes her again. The second time, she's smarter, and her brain is quicker to fire up. She keeps her breathing as close to how it had been when she'd woken up as she can, and doesn't open her eyes. She can sense that someone is still in the room, someone who isn't supposed to be there, or someone they weren't supposed to be awake to deal with. The high Atlantic focuses on her other senses, forcing her body to stay still and limp as if she were still asleep. She's horribly nauseous, but wills her stomach to stay settled for now, while she listens. She hears a noise outside the door again, and then a low sigh of clear relief. Thank the goddess! I had to hit Bellwether again while you were gone. Are we done? a voice asks in barely a whisper. Yes, fall back, a second voice confirms just as quietly, and there's the sound of sheets rustling from her missing sister's bunk. It's the familiar one again, and it's so, so familiar. She knows that she has to know who it belongs to. She wants to crack her eyes open and look, but she can't risk them knowing she's awake again. She waits and listens until she hears the quietest click of the door and the now audible sound of footsteps moving away from the room. Abigail stays still until she can't make them out anymore and is quick to sit up. The motion makes her dizzy, and her stomach rolls in warning as she feels the color drain from her face. She forces herself to take slow, deep breaths until the room stops spinning again, and then puts her legs over the side of her bunk and plants her bare feet on the floor. She can see that Rael has been returned and is sleeping in her bunk like she had been before. It's mildly unnerving, but it makes Abigail understand. They weren't supposed to know the blonde had been taken at all. The taller witch quickly pats over to her sister's bunk as she starts to become restless again and is sitting down on the edge of the bunk near her head when Rael wakes up, panting and frenzied. She's trembling and drenched from head to toe in a cold sheen of sweat. Oh God, the blonde mutters, throwing the blankets off of herself and launching quickly to her feet from the bunk before Abigail can reach for her to try to comfort her like she usually does. Rael is up and pacing, running her hands through her hair in her frantic distress, and Abigail isn't sure what to do as the blonde shakes Tally's bunk, using the full weight of her body to shake the entire frame back and forth a few times. She's never seen her sister like this, and it's worrying. The entire situation is worrying, and Abigail can only watch. Tally, wake up! The fixer cries, her breathing hitching and her voice rising in pitch as she shakes the bed frame. What is it? What happened? Abigail asks, keeping her voice calm and low while she pushes herself up to her feet. Whatever had gone on or been done while her sister was gone is clearly the cause of this, and that knowledge makes her feel no better. What? What time is it? Tally wonders, her voice groggy from sleep while she sits up in her bunk. Zilla's alive! I was in her jail cell. She's being tortured. The army is holding her, Rael explains, speaking faster and higher until she's nearly choking on her own words. She hasn't stopped her frenzied motions, nearly jogging in place when she can't focus her motor skills into a straight pace any longer. Her blue eyes are wild and red-rimmed as she scans the room, unseeing as she tries to catch up with her thoughts. Rael? Hey, I need you to slow down and look at me. Abigail soothes, using her given name and starting to step closer. She needs to get the blonde to calm down. Ray, you're sweating. It was just a dream, Tally yawns, rubbing at her eyes as she takes in her sister's. No, Tell! Abigail, Abby, it was real, please! Rael pants. Her tone, while still frantic, has slipped into the defensive, and she looks desperately at Abigail, begging her with her eyes to believe her. Call her, the taller witch starts, moving closer with her hands up to show she means no harm. I wasn't dreaming, oh God, the fixer insists, cutting her off while her movement finally seems to slow down. Her hands hurry to grip at her stomach as a heavy wave of nausea overtakes her. She drops to her knees, Abigail following her down and pulling back her short hair as she loses the contents of her stomach into the metal trash can at the foot of the bunk. Tally winces at the sound of Rael vomiting, but it's over soon, and Rael sits on her knees, still panting and hunched over. I believe you, caller. I don't think you were dreaming either. I promise. I believe you, Abigail promises, rubbing her back until the blonde's breathing starts to go back to normal and her shoulders stop shaking. You do? Tally wonders in disbelief, looking at them both with wide eyes. She's alive, Abigail. She's alive, and they're holding her and torturing her. They used me to torture her. Why would they do that? That's so fucked up, Rael hiccups, tears starting to fall as they both realize why she'd been brought here. It was fucked up, and it makes the taller witch clench her jaw to try and contain her fast-growing anger. She gently pulls at her sister's shoulders until they're sitting on the floor with their backs resting against the long side of Rael's bunk. I do. Tell, Caller's right. She's alive. I don't know why they'd do that to either of you. Unless... The blaster begins, her stomach turning as an idea comes to her. They wouldn't. It couldn't be. Unless, the blonde repeats, drawing the high Atlantic out of her thoughts and looking over at her with tortured blue eyes. Unless they needed to get her to drop her guard enough to force a link with her. It's an advanced intelligence gathering technique used on enemy agents, Abigail hurries to answer, recalling the information from something she'd read upon learning how to link with another witch. It only makes her angrier. The blonde had finally just started to seem like she might be okay eventually. She had been doing so much better. The taller witch has been slowly but surely stitching together all the broken pieces of her sister, and someone had just come in with a pair of scissors and a book of matches to undo her hard work. She said they wanted something she can give them. What if they think she has information that she doesn't have? What if that's why they're torturing her? What then? Rael asks in a horrified whisper. I don't know, Rael, but we're gonna figure it out, okay? The taller witch answers with an unyielding firmness that makes her sister nod. City drop starts now, soldiers. I need you suited and booted, Quartermain orders, opening their door and appearing in the doorway in full grey and black strike gear. That voice. Her voice. Abigail's head whips up and she locks onto the sergeant with burning eyes. Anacostia was one of the people who'd brought scissors to her careful stitch work. City drop is now? Tally repeats incredulously. The older witch's eyes scan appraisingly around the room, finding Rael half concealed where she sits on the floor by Abigail's right. Pull it together, caller. Bellwether. We're wheels up at 0500, the sergeant continues before leaving. But Abigail had caught it. The smallest traces of guilt and regret that seems to model and soften the stern woman's gaze for just a second as her eyes had fallen on her blonde sister. Those emotions, while generally abnormal for the stoic sergeant to show anyway, even as subtly as she just did, are also just as out of place for an announcement of their equivalent of a final exam for basic training as they were on the woman to begin with. There was something going on. Something that affected her smaller sister, the most delicate of them right now. And Abigail decides right then that she's going to do her best to make the sergeant's life a special type of hell that only a bellwether can inflict, until they get their answers. City drop is a disaster. Even through her anger, though it had been mostly directed at Tally, like Rael's had been, she'd been keeping a vigilant eye on her blonde sister. The fixer was still shattering and spinning, but it felt like they all were. By the end, the three are all shell-shocked and exhausted, each for their own reasons. The Swithe unit was gone. 1 minute Abigail and Libba were almost friends, almost allies. 1 minute Libba and her unit stand ready at Abigail's right, while her sister stand at her left, and she feels like she can do anything. The next she's waking up in a helicopter on the way back to base, and Quartermain's voice is subdued when she explains that not everyone made it home. Libba looks so small in death. She's always been small, but it's much more pronounced without the bravado she'd carefully crafted and worn like a cloak, like armor. So innocent, like the kids they'd only just finished being. Not children any longer, but not yet full adults. She looks like she's just sleeping, just resting, and it makes something in Abigail snap, and she bags and breaks and demands that her rival wake up. Her sergeant pulls her back, but the High Atlantic snarls at her and forces herself free, sliding across the bay to the other corner and sobbing onto her knees, curling up in a tight ball. Rael is also small. She's not much bigger than Libba. She only has about an inch or so over Swithe. Tally is only an inch or two shorter than Abigail herself, but it still makes her smaller than the blaster. It could have been any of them that had died. It could have been either of her sisters or Abigail herself. She doesn't ever want to see either of her sisters like that. Not like that. It pulls the curtains away from what she thought the reality of surfing was. Someone had told her she was ignorant of the world. She's a little less so now. Tally is haunted. She's haunted by the innocence, by the unnecessary deaths around her. She's shaken to her core. They'd killed innocent people. They'd been ordered to kill innocent people, innocent civilians. She'd felt their fear and their desire to live up until the point it had been snuffed out with the destruction of their appointed target. They're supposed to be the good guys. They're the good guys, aren't they? The good guys don't hurt the innocent. And the Swithe unit, their fellow cadets, their sisters of the blood, they were gone too. More innocents who'd done nothing wrong, who'd only been trying to do what was right. They had just been following orders. They'd all just been following orders. Maybe her mother had been right. Riel is the most sound of them, which really says something for how bad of a shape her sisters are in if she's doing the best of the three. Riel is hardened. She's still broken and still healing, but there's a steeliness to her now, an edge like a blade. She's no stranger to death. She's never seen it up close before, never tried to stop it in the way that she had, but it's not exactly new. She'd gotten to Abigail first. Tally had seemed okay, but Abigail was bleeding from a gash across her forehead. Riel had spotted Libba next. She wasn't far from Abigail, but she was much more gravely injured. It looked like she'd shoved Abigail away and taken shrapnel for it. The girls' unit mates were already gone. There was too much blood for them to be still alive, and Libba was closer. "What are you doing?" the smaller girl had wheezed as the blonde had hurried to drop to her side. "Fixing," she'd huffed, putting her hands gently around Libba's neck, like she always did when she was fixing something major. "With your backwater hick shit?" Libba teased in a wheeze. Riel knew she'd been scared. Most people are scared of dying, and Libba had been trying to hide it with humor. "Yup, now keep breathing and let me concentrate. Bellwether's gonna be pissed if she doesn't get to be the one who kills you herself," the blonde joked, and had gotten a wheezing chuckle from her patient. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Through the rivers, they shall not flood you. When you walk through the fires, you shall not be burned." Riel closed her eyes as she muttered the words. She'd got snippets of the truck and of her bantering with Abigail through the link. She could feel the damage. It had been bad. It was worse than anything she'd ever attempted to heal before, but she didn't stop trying. Libba was a pain, but she'd had been one of them. Her chest started to burn and ache as the skin split for every inch she'd healed the smaller girl. "Private Caller, stand down. Let one of the field medics take over. You've done good for now, but we got it from here," Sergeant Quartermain ordered gently, placing a hand on one of her shoulders. It's then that Riel had noticed the older strike witches had come to join her. 2 had been kneeling by the fallen private's other side and were waiting for her to back off so they can take over. She'd backed up but hadn't gone far. She'd wanted to observe, to learn. They didn't have much better luck than she did. The damage was too much. Hey, Caller, you tell Bell. You tell Bellwether that I'll be waiting. That I'll be waiting to kick her ass again when it's her turn." Libba coughed and sputtered, looking for Riel's eyes, and she'd held them, even as her own began to dull, until the blonde had nodded. Tally was back on her feet by then, and she'd pulled Riel back up to hers, tugging them after the rest of their uninjured fellows and into a helicopter. The medics and Anacostia had loaded the Swithe unit and Abigail into another helicopter, and the rest of the injured into a third before all 3 bats took off. The right back was silent, and she held Tally's hand while they both took laps to process. Riel had to figure out a lot over the past few days, and she has. Scylla is spree. She's a spree agent. She didn't want to believe it. She loves Scylla. Loves. The blonde isn't sure, to be honest. But she doesn't trust her anymore. That's for damn sure. She's forgiven Tally, but she's not sure if she trusts her sister entirely anymore either. She wants to. They'll have to work on that. She'd still die for Tally. Tally is her sister, but she doesn't fully trust her after this. Even if it was in the name of protecting her, Riel can protect herself. Riel trusts Abigail. Trusts her more than anyone, although she loathed to admit it. Abigail, who hasn't lied to her yet, she hopes. Abigail, who's only seemed to earn her trust and get under her guard and around her sharp edges without her even noticing. Abigail, who is stubborn but steady and has only tried to help her since that day on the beach. Abigail, who Riel now needs to figure out how to tell Libba's last message. Abigail, who she doesn't have the heart to tell that Libba Swithe, her sworn enemy and lifetime rival, had probably not only saved her life when it counted most, but also died for her too by doing so. Abigail, who's probably still suffering from her own demons from the wedding, but she's been busy dealing with the blondes instead. Fuck. She's a bad sister. She'll need to work on that too.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.